Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the very first Labco Fitness podcast. Today I have with me Joshua Nademan.
Hey, what's up, guys and ladies and everyone?
Yeah, I think everyone. That's a nice, good introduction.
That was a terrible introduction. Don't lie to me.
It's terrible. It is terrible.
It's
but that's
okay.
fine. It's we're here to learn. We're not here to learn how to introduce ourselves. We're here to learn to get big biceps. These are not considered big at Labcoat yet. Josh would say they're puny. That's fine.
I mean, it's all about comparisons.
We're here to learn. Okay,
Yeah.
we're here to learn to get big biceps.
Yeah, it's not about having somebody else's biceps. It's about figuring out how to make your own stretch your shirt sleeves.
Exactly, that's the goal here.
That's what it's about.
I'm trying to get an L. Okay, anyway, moving on. So at these podcasts, the AMA podcast, we get questions from you. This first one is a bit different because we got questions during the pre-launch. The other podcast will be getting questions. We'll be getting questions from the website. You can check all that out on labcofitness.com. In the meantime, we'll answer the questions we have been sent in via the email. And you want to get to it, Josh?
Sure.
You want to do this?
Go for it. Hit me up. I
All
don't
right,
have
so-
my document open, so you're going to guide me through it. This is
It's all
much more
fine.
ad-lib than people realize.
This is really ad-lib.
Yeah, this is...
So the first question is Cole Dano?
Okay, who's that guy?
I have no idea.
He sounds
Who's Cole?
sounds like somebody pretty cool.
Cole Dano? What, you know what? You tell something about Cole Dano.
Man, I've known Cole since I think 2011, and we met at a gymnastic body seminar a million years ago, back before the business got started and the feel of the place changed. And so we just stayed in touch, and then a couple years later, I ended up over in Finland for a couple of days teaching a seminar on advanced training and specifically nutrition for elite athletes and people who are already on track to be a national competitor, and how things are a little bit different in that arena and what matters and what doesn't, And so he hosted me there. He hooked everything up. He and his wife are really fantastic people. I don't know what to say. Also, Finland has great chocolate, man. Oh my God. The Karl Fazer is really, really good. But so we stayed in touch, and then I finished college, started medical school, and at some point, for a long time, I've wanted to do something that is evidence-based and takes advantage of what we know about human physiology and sports science and a bunch of other stuff that people don't care about, that allows us to become better athletes with the time that we have, right? And that means different things. Some people want to look good. Some people want to run fast. Some people just want to lift something heavy. There's a million different goals out there. Those are just 3 of them. And whatever it is, we're all in remarkably similar machines. And so whatever else we are, these bodies are machines, and they've inherited different aspects of our ancestors' abilities, right? Whatever worked well in certain areas tended to get passed on. And then there's been a lot of mixing over the last several thousand years, and especially the last 200 years as travel's opened up. So it's really, really important to have a perspective that says, okay, research says this is the average, but this is, and then break it down and say, you know what does that really mean for the individual? How do you turn that into what you need? And that's what Lab Coat's all about, is about taking the very generalized things that are out there, filtering them through the additional knowledge that we have from medical school, genetics, and a number of other things, and coming up with a system that allows each person to figure out what their body needs right now and to keep up with what it's going to need in the future, right? It's figuring out where point A is for you and moving forward as far as you want to go without you having to really know anything. And that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, so we basically went from who is Cole Dano to what is Labco Fitness.
Yeah, that kind of
So
ran
this
because
is a-
Cole is the reason that Lab Coat is happening. Just like you're
Yeah,
the reason that we have
definitely.
content. Like,
Aw.
because these guys stay on me, and that's really important because I have a lot going on. I have an hour of travel every day. I have a pregnant wife. My father lives with me. He's 86 and medically complicated. And, and doing fantastic, by the way. I mean, he's gotten more exercise in the last 2 months than he has in the last 5 years. And
Great.
He's doing incredible. But I'm very busy, and it's easy for me to get lost in stuff, and I'm ADD to begin with. So I need people to keep me on track. And they do that. And without them, nothing would happen. So, yeah.
And that's thank you, Josh. And without Josh, we wouldn't have Labco Fitness because he's the mind, the content mind. He basically morphed me into the athlete I am now. The reason why I'm doing Maltesers, Victorians, and shit is because of this guy. So, Josh, thank you for that. Enough bromance, though. Let's move on to the next question. Michael Moore, thank you for your question. The next question is from
Wait, is this
Tommaso.
the guy who wrote that McDonald's thing back in the day? Or is it a different Michael Moore?
This is I hope it's a different Michael Moore.
I don't know. It doesn't really matter. I was just curious. Sorry.
All right, so the next question is from Tommaso Cazzaniga. Sorry for the mispronunciation, which is it's probably mispronounced by me. And he asks, does the 3-second eccentric rule apply no matter what you're training for?
Absolutely
I think this is
not.
a good question for you. Okay, well.
Yeah, and so
Please,
that may
elaborate.
surprise people, but there's a difference in how you train for size and how you train for speed and how you train for power, how you train for agility, how you train for very slow controlled movements. So depending on what you're doing and where you're at in a training cycle, you're going to change almost everything about the way you approach your exercises. And that's just something people are not very well connected with. I mean, it makes sense when you hear it, but then the next question is, well, what should I do now? And of course, they skipped a couple of the really important ones, like, what are your abilities in these different areas right now? And what do you need right now? And that means a better evaluation. It means that we need to know what your goals are before that conversation can mean anything. Otherwise, you get 20 different answers from 20 different people. Each one could be very good in the right situation, but none of them might be what this person wants. And so that's really that's what I'll say about that. So the 3-second eccentric rule is specifically for when you are focusing on building new muscle mass. And the reason for that is that we're looking to strike a balance between the signals that cause muscle growth, which are complicated and I'm not going to get into on this question, and
Thank you.
the inevitable muscle damage that comes along with it. There's a myth that damage causes growth, and that is completely untrue. Damage is an unavoidable part of the process that triggers growth, just like exhaust is an unavoidable part of running a combustion engine. It doesn't mean you need exhaust for an engine to run. It just means that it's an inherent part of the process, and you shouldn't be looking to produce more exhaust. You should be focused on what that engine is supposed to do and let the exhaust be what it will be. And then there's, of course, people who know more about motors understand that, there's pressure things and all this other stuff. So, yes, it's more complicated than that. But the bottom line is that the damage happens, but it is not causative. And the sooner people get that in their heads, the easier it will be to move on and train smarter.
Well, so can I ask a question? When would you stop trying to build muscle then?
If you are a weight class athlete, there's an obvious limit to the amount of muscle you can carry and still compete in your preferred weight class. Can
you still get stronger then?
Yeah, up to a point. So everybody's got inherent limits. There are a lot of things that go into strength. The biggest part of it is muscle mass, because that is the fundamental underlying ceiling, right? Everything else is about how that mass is used, and depending on the muscle group we're talking about, its architectural structure, like pennation angle and things like that. And so those things can shift, and they can cause, off the top of my head, you can get about a 20% strength increase from in certain muscle groups from a pronation angle shift, 15 to 20, something like that. And we'll talk about that separately. It doesn't matter what it means. It's good for people to start learning and asking their own questions, because that's a part of what this is about, right? And then, but those things are modifications to mass that already exists. And if you are bigger, you are always going to be stronger than the you at a smaller size. You may not be stronger than somebody else, right? And that's its own question as to why are some people stronger than others at the same body weight. It's a beautifully simple answer, but the question hasn't been asked yet, so we're not going to go there.
Okay, we're going to discuss that off camera later on.
Yeah, boy.
Because he's got me even freaking interested in that. So, Tommaso, I hope that sort of answers your question and opened up a lot of more questions.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on to the next question, which is from Abdul Ghani Memon. Why do I pronounce everything American like? I'm not even American. Anyway, he asks, how can one stay disciplined, motivated each day to complete their workout? I love working out and I enjoy the results, but for some reason, I always have difficulty to actually go and exercise.
Yeah.
Well, you're not the only one.
No,
you're
he's
not. The only one with
that pops up at least once a week on the various fitness subreddits. And so the short answer is that you need to show up. And you need to have something written down so that you're not dependent on you in the moment for those days. If you show up and you have a plan, all you need to do is execute the plan. And for most people, that's more of a challenge than we think it should be. But life gets busy. There's a lot of stuff that happens that affects us in ways that we don't expect. And that's a part of being alive and being human. And that's a very individual answer, Some people, it depends on the time in life. Like right now, it's very hard for me because I'm tired all the time, because I'm a medical resident and an intern on top of that. And I'm in med peds, so I have two specialties to learn, not one. And they're both like the two broadest specialties on the planet. So there's a lot going on there. Plus, we're doing business stuff. Plus, I'm building the lab. So, walls are almost complete. Lighting is on the floor and wired and is going up later today.
What's the lab? People
the
don't know
lab.
that. What's the lab?
The lab is going to be one of our filming facilities. It's going to be really, really cool. I have a 40 by 40 foot tractor shed that right now about a third of it is lined with stall mats and gym equipment. I have built walls so that we have space for filming, good lighting. It looks professional. And we'll have space for sponsors as things like that appear in the future. And
are you?
Yeah. So we have a lot of plans that are moving forward, and that space is a part of making sure that we can continue to grow as a company and as a community, and to give the quality that people deserve. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
So how do I stay motivated? Sometimes I'm not, man. Sometimes, and when I say sometimes, I can tell you that 2 weeks out of every month, I am not motivated. Why 2 weeks out of every month? Because for 2 weeks out of every month, I am on an inpatient service and I am working an official 80 hours or so. With my drive time, that becomes 94 hours. And if you do a little bit of math and you say, all right, well, these are 13-hour work days. And then 2 more hours for travel if I go home. All of a sudden, I have 7 hours. Well, I have I guess 9 hours left in the 24-hour day, right?
You still need to eat. You still need to sleep.
Yeah, I mean, I still have notes.
Any family time,
dude. I still have notes to finish.
Well,
that's it. Gone. All time gone. That's the way that it works. That's called being a resident. And everybody knows it's true, especially as an intern. We do become more efficient, but it is hard. It's hard to finish before 9 o'clock. Like we clock out and then we go home and we take care of the rest of our stuff because that's the nature of the workload that we have. And so I don't stay motivated. I just try and remember to do a few small things at work when I can, Some rotations just don't let me. And when I can't do that, I honestly don't worry about it. I just call those an unavoidable 2 weeks off. On my 1 day a week where I'm off, I sleep a lot, I eat, and I will work out that day. And so I will just have a much harder workout on that day. And I probably won't really feel like it, but I'll do it anyway because I would like to at least maintain the body that I built to some degree. And so
makes sense.
For that one, it's more of that falls under discipline, not motivation. Motivation is an emotional high in a way. And everybody understands you can't be high all the time, no matter how much you try, even Cheech and Chong. So for my older people out there who know who that is. And
no idea.
Yeah, they were these crazy guys in the 70s who were really... I always was entertained. They just smoked enormous amounts of marijuana and were always high. That was their thing. That's what they were known for. Set them for life. Very funny. The thing with motivation, when we have new projects coming up, that gets me motivated. When I know that, so we have our... goals tend to bring both motivation and discipline. The setting of goals, I think, brings motivation because you put something on paper. So to answer the question more directly, to have motivation, you have to have a goal that has emotional meaning to you. That's and that's one of the things, like so many people are depressed, because... And there's a lot of different reasons. Everybody has inherited different sort of vulnerabilities to depression, but we all have the ability to become depressed, and about 80% of us will experience it at least once in our lives. So why does it happen? And a lot of it is because the things that we have in our lives don't really involve our dreams. We are not working to create something that doesn't exist yet, right? Because that's what a dream is. It doesn't exist yet, but it could. Lab coat was very motivating. This whole process, getting this, like knowing that I have been very motivated by wanting to film. So I have been building this gym. I've been collecting equipment over the years, and now we're lighting it and getting everything arranged so we can actually teach with it, so that I can go in and have a great place to work out, to host people. It's just all kinds of things. That motivates me. And when that's built and done, I'm going to be going over there every morning, even if it's for 5 minutes. And that's something that I've already been doing. I just make it a part of my morning routine. I sacrifice 5 minutes of sleep, sometimes unsuccessfully. And when I do it right, which is at least half the days of the week, I go over there and I do 10, 15 minutes of stuff, and then I leave. And
That's good.
Yeah, because I want to show you guys that even when you're busy, you can do it. I am not perfect, and I don't have the body I had 11 years ago. Far from it. I've had a lot of injuries, and those can be demotivating too when you have limits.
Oh, hell yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's the difficult thing, is you need to find meaning, even if it's small. Don't be grand necessarily. Find something that you want to achieve, and then the discipline comes with the daily doing. So to get motivated, you kind of have to run yourself through, like, what's this going to be? What am I creating? Get yourself back into the idea that you love, and then move, get out, do, achieve, accomplish. Because motivation doesn't work when you know you're lying. When you say, I want to do this, but you have taken 0 steps forward, you can't fool yourself, right? And that can be a very, very difficult cycle to break once it gets started. Mm-hmm. And that's where discipline really allows you to recover motivation when you've lost it. And motivation allows you to maintain discipline. So they're both very important. They're very heavily intertwined. They don't really exist separately. And I think that, I guess this is a much longer-winded answer than I intended, because it's important and it's complicated. And
it's one of the most important things.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, if you have a good training routine, your nutrition is good, but if you don't put the work in, nothing's gonna happen. Compliance is the most those three
Right.
pillars are very important. But
Right.
if one of them drops, you got nothing.
And
You
one
need,
of
you need,
well, I was going to say, I was while you were doing that, I was thinking, and I think that one of the big things is being a part of a community, whether it's in person or online, and posting things regularly. Show people what you've been
that
doing.
helps. Yeah.
Don't care. Don't even check what people say about it unless you've submitted a form check. Just turn commenting off. Don't look at it, whatever. And just post. Just be a
Share.
part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because now you have joined a group. I always was more motivated by far when I was taking my buddies Andrew and Brian to the gym because I wanted to show them what they were capable of. I wanted to show them to show themselves what they were capable of, and we all had a great time. But none of us would have worked as hard as we did if we were in it by ourselves. And so, I mean, that's the magic behind CrossFit. People keep going because they're seeing their friends. And
You're
so
right.
I think that keeping that in your life in some way, I don't care if it's Bar Stars, I don't care if it's us, I don't care really where it is, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, the subreddits you love, be a part of something and post regularly.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also going back to the discipline motivation thing. How I do it basically is I noticed having a routine in my life really helped. I actually did a speech on this yesterday. I got my bachelor, I graduated, and they asked if I could give a speech as a valedictorian. And they basically asked how is it that you could set up a company, work out 25 hours a week, and still get good grades for medicine. Basically, it's if you have habits, if you have a routine in life, everything's Gucci. Having that helps. Of course, I was always motivated because I started when I was 14, and once you get that track running, and you're really in that cycle, it's hard to break that. And I actually broke that cycle like a year ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm finally getting back into the track, and I'm making huge gains. Maltesers, Victorians, life is good.
And that was tough for you. I mean, you definitely went through some personal difficulties, and it takes time to get over that. And I think that giving yourself permission to be less than perfect in that process is the key to making it through successfully.
Yes, sir.
Right? Because we always talked and just said, just do something. I don't care if it's one set. Just do something and get out. Don't have...
Today, for example, I just walked into the gym. I didn't feel like working at all because my knees felt bad and my elbows are still recovering. But I just did a bunch of stuff, really lightweight, but I did stuff, and it kept me motivated. And now I'm going tomorrow back to the gym and do another bunch of stuff, and just it's not the plan that I'm following, but it's still I'm doing stuff, keeping myself going, not refraining myself from not doing anything, because I'm usually an all nothing guy. I either do all of it or do nothing. But now I've grown up.
You're doing an exceptionally good job, really, because that's the key. That's funny. Now, this is switching gears, but you mentioned your elbows. Why don't you tell people, because this is a very common experience, I think it's good for people to know that even highly accomplished people who are up and coming can have this happen to them, because it's easy to be excited, and it's easy to love what you do, and it's hard to approach that correctly, especially when you're coming back from a lower volume period. So tell people about what happened.
So I was on a lower volume period because I'm in my gap year, and it's hard to get into working out. So I've been working out inconsistently, and the last 2-3 weeks I came up with a way to stay consistent in life. Basically, I have a calendar which keeps me working out properly, but the workout that I had written down is something I never actually did 100% of the time, and now I actually started doing 100% of the time, meaning I was doing a lot of planches, a lot of Maltesers, and a lot of curls and stuff, which my body wasn't used to because I'm not doing it anymore. And then slowly, I had tendonitis like 1.5 years ago on both my brachioradialis, and I kind of felt a tightness on both of them. Just the very beginning stadium, I caught it very early. And I was like, nope, you gotta stop, dude. You're going too fast. So I put the brake on it. Back in the old days, I would have not done that. I would have been like, fuck that, keep going. But now I stopped on time, and the lesson is basically when you go from low volume to your own volume again. First, check what is the difference in volume. Is it a big difference? Most of the time, it is, and then you need to gradually increase the volume,
right?
Really gradually.
And we've got guides.
Usually, you want to get back.
Yeah. That's the thing. Is that you come to the site, you're going to have good guidance on how to do that. It's simpler than you think most of the time. And if you have trouble, we have consults available, and we can help you do things if you are having trouble on your own.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on to Abdul. I hope we kind of covered your question. Enough.
The short version without all the discussion, which we should, guess, splice into a different video, is when you're dealing with motivation and I keep thinking determination, but it's the wrong one. What was the other one? Discipline. Yeah, geez. So you have to remember that neither one exists in a vacuum, and neither one is necessarily going to be there all the time. If you've lost motivation for a long time, it's probably because you no longer have dreams. Like, you occasionally think about it, but you're not. Instead of saying, yes, I am accomplishing this, I'm moving forward and I have a goal, you're saying, I wished I was doing this, I miss doing. You're focused on the past, you're focused on the not doing, right? Because when you say, I wish I was, what you're really saying is, I am still not. And it's very important to have a clear internal dialogue. And once you recognize it, change the dialogue with action. The words are less important than what you do. And if you hear yourself saying things like, I wish I was doing this, stop, say, gosh, I'm still not doing that, am I? How can I move forward if I don't do something? And what is something? Anything that's not 0. Do 4 push-ups and walk away and say, I did push-ups today. And I'm going to do more tomorrow.
We're not sponsored by Nike, but honestly, just do it.
Yeah, that's and it sounds simpler than it is, which is why I kind of wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
If you don't get yourself in the mood by saying honestly to yourself, gosh, maybe I've let my mind get out of line a little bit. Maybe I have gotten into a thought pattern set that isn't getting me where I want to go. And if you find yourself ever saying, I wish I was, change that to I am still not, and then immediately follow it up with, I am going to do something today to get back on track. And I don't care if it takes 30 seconds. You can deal with hour-long workouts in the future. If you do 30 seconds today and you did 0 seconds yesterday, you just did infinitely more. And it's very, very easy from there to build back up. And it doesn't take that long, right? So that's what you do.
All right, let's move on to the next topic.
Yeah.
Moving on. Timotey Krajnik. Sorry. He asks,
these names
if I understand correctly, I know these names are hard. If I understand correctly, with a hypertrophy focused routine, oh my god, I totally mispronounced that too.
That's all right.
Hypertrophy focused routine increasing volume over time is the number one factor. What should I aim for if I want my routine to be strength focused? So not hypertrophy, but strength.
Well, I would say that the first thing is to understand that hypertrophy is the largest component of strength. The size of a muscle directly correlates to how much force it is capable of producing. And that means that the size is the single biggest factor. And most importantly, it is the only thing that you can reliably modify long term. So
what is the other thing?
Well, there are short-term modifications that happen over the course of 2 to 3 months, and that's like your intramuscular coordination when you go heavier with lower reps and higher weight. And so what that does is it coordinates all the muscle fibers so that, like, if you have 10 teams of 10, and that's not how it's organized, but it's easier to think about, instead of having like 7-2-1, you end up with like 8-1-1, 8-2, 9-1, 10 over the course of 12 weeks. So what you've done is, instead of, saying having a maximum of 70% of the muscle mass working at one time, you'll have closer to 100%. And that allows the force to get added up. It causes a higher peak force, which means that your muscle didn't actually get stronger, but you got better at using it. So the weight that you move increases. And that's an important thing to understand about the short-term things like that. The other thing that also happens relatively short-term in certain muscle groups are pennation angle changes. We've mentioned it before. That's basically where, if you have a tendon like this, and like so, for example, let me pull the skeleton that I'm sending back over here for a second. I have a better one in the gym. So, just kind of randomly pulling a knee up. It probably looks super weird. All right, so the knee is now on screen. All right, so everybody knows this is the outside. All the quadriceps, the fibers come at an angle. They're kind of like trapezoids, where they don't pull straight back. They pull like at an angle, right? So not all of that force that they produce is going straight this way. But the reason that's a good idea to have instead of straight muscles like biceps is that you can pack 3 to 4 times more parallel fibers. So, for example, it's like having 400 people working instead of 100 people working. You literally have more muscle fibers, and that means that you have more total force production. You gain 400% or like 300% in terms of working muscle fibers and the meaningful, what we call the physiological cross-sectional area. And you lose, maybe 30-ish% of the maximal strength of each fiber. But so you gained 300%. If you lose 30%, you basically net something like 210 to 220% gains in that muscle group in terms of the strength by having it that way. The trade-off is that they have a shorter range of motion.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's okay. And so certain areas of the body, it is reasonable to do that. Others, it is not. And we can talk about that later. That's more of a anatomy and biomechanics intersection, and it helps understand why certain muscle groups are important for certain athletes. But that's a very high-level discussion. The important thing to understand is that those angles can change. And when they're more in line with the direction of movement, a higher percentage of the force gets transferred into movement. And so if you go from an angle of, say, like 60 degrees, where you are losing more than half of your force, and to an angle of 45, you're gaining something like, I should do the signs on this real quick so that the math geeks don't slaughter me on this. So we'll say 100 sine. Yeah, there we go. Oh, never mind. Right. So we really want 30 sine. Yeah, so at 30 degrees, so basically when I say 30 degrees, if this vertical line, which I'm making with my hand, is directly in line, this is about a 45-degree pennation angle. Some muscles have been recorded as much as 60 degrees in bodybuilders. And what they do is so that means that only 30% of the force is, well, that's really the wrong way to say it. Because the angle is 30 degrees, the way that the math works out, if that produces 100 pounds of force, 50 pounds is pulling sideways, which is not producing motion, and 50 pounds is pulling in line. So effectively, you can only move 50 pounds. If you change that angle to 45, then the difference is instead of a 50% reduction, you only get a 30% reduction. So you effectively became not just 20% stronger, but if you say, okay, I was moving 50 pounds, now I'm moving 70 pounds, right? Well, 70 divided by 50 is like, what is this crap? I used to be able to do this stuff in my head so easily. Yeah, that's what I thought. 40% strength increase, right? But here's the thing. It's only a 20% increase in the utilization of the maximal force, right? So if that muscle produced the exact same force, you're able to use 20% more of the maximum. But if you were using 50% of the max, you go up to 70% of the max, then what happens is that the way the numbers work out, that changes a 50-pound lift into a 70-pound lift, right? So you just gained 20 pounds. Well, that's 40% gains over 50 pounds. And so that's where the numbers kind of throw people off, and that's where like having people who are a little more experienced with some of this stuff and are used to giving it, you can get better figures. The important thing is that that's a big increase, right? And that's why a lot of times if you go to something like a dedicated singles program, if you enter it correctly, and I'm not talking about dating, right? Talking about heavy lifts at like 90-95%. And what you end up doing is that you will have architectural changes in certain muscle groups. Not all muscle groups can do that, but a fair number can. And the quadriceps and the calves are really one of the best examples, and specifically the gastrocnemius. They can have massive shifts over the course of as little as 2 months. And so you can see a huge increase in power output with the appropriate programming changes. And that's also why you find people, like certain lifts go up much more than others when you do things like this. Like squats can nearly double. And if you have always been doing high rep squats, you can be very, very surprised. Because here's the deal, right? If you are super inefficient and you are missing out on approximately 20% of the force that you could produce. If you were squatting 300 pounds, that would make your squat 360 pounds at minimum, right? Because again, this is a percentage of the maximum that your muscle could do. But then if there's an angle shift, like if you've been doing super high rep sets, like 20 pounds, and you are currently, 20 reps, and you're currently maxing out at like 450, which is not totally unreasonable. Those are pretty realistic numbers. If you were repping out 300, you probably, and you've never lifted heavy, your whole program is high rep, you're probably maxing out around, 450. And then there's a lot of stuff that can start happening if you completely abandon the high rep stuff and shift just to really low rep training. You have to shift it in slowly in order to do it totally safely. But when you're complete, even if you didn't gain any extra muscle mass between the angle shifts and the quadriceps and the better coordination, you can easily see your max go from 450 to probably 600, and that gets really strong people in trouble sometimes because they don't understand that this is nowhere near enough time for my attachment points to adapt, and so if I'm not very careful with the volume, then I can get myself in real trouble. And the trouble isn't in those heavy lifts. You're not really going to necessarily do enough singles to hurt yourself. It's when you eventually go back to those higher rep lifts. And now you're lifting like 400 pounds for sets of 15. And you're like, oh man, this is fantastic. Now you have the ability to produce an extreme volume overload that is way, way, way beyond what you need or what you're really ready to handle safely. And that's where you run into injuries. And so that's really where coaching services are very, very important.
Yeah, but that brings us back to the question. He was asking, should people focus on volume during the hypertrophy? And he says, wait, let me just read.
Well, he doesn't know the question that he's asking. Here's what he's trying to ask. He's trying to ask.
No, wait. Let me just say the question again.
Yeah.
So, if I understand correctly, with hypertrophy focused routine, increasing volume over the time is the number one factor. Now, what should I aim for if I want my routine to be strength focused? Also, volume or something else?
It's still, so because hypertrophy is the biggest influence on strength long term, it's still your number one goal.
Okay.
if you're looking for long-term strength gains. If you're looking for short-term strength gains, it is not what you're looking for. And so that's why what I was going to say is that he doesn't really know the question that he wants to ask because it's not specific enough. If you want long-term strength gains, then yeah, you still should be focusing on hypertrophy. If you want to constantly be running closer to your maximum strength potential, that means that you'll be lifting heavier. You might be using less reps with a higher % 1 rep max. The trick is whether or not your body actually responds well to that for growth. You may find that you get stronger for 4 or 5 months and then all of a sudden it stops working. And what that tells you is that that is a good peaking strategy for you because it's a good peaking strategy for literally every human alive because that's how our nervous system adapts. But once the angle changes are done and once your body has learned the coordination, you're really kind of left with at a glass ceiling unless you get bigger again. And that's the thing that nobody wants to believe. I don't know why. It's like no matter what you do, if you have a 4-cylinder engine that produces a certain compression ratio, no matter what you do with your gears, and no matter what you do with anything else that you put into that car, if you don't put a bigger engine in, you're just going to be limited. There's only so much you can do. There are temporary things, but you cannot increase your maximum torque without putting a bigger engine in. You know, all you can do is maximize the efficiency of the machine you currently have, and you run out of options on that pretty quickly. And it's the same thing is true for human bodies. Eventually, it just needs to get a little bigger.
All right. Well, I think we covered that question. I hope. Let me see. What was the name again? Timotey Krajnik. Sorry again. Thank you for asking that question. I hope we covered that well for you. Moving on to the next question, and I think this will be the last question for this podcast. Let me choose a nice one. Actually, let's just go with this one because, let's just go for it.
Just let it flow, man.
It's Alan. Alan says, I don't have a full 180 degrees shoulder flexion for handstands.
Okay.
For a full shoulder flexion, 120 degrees comes from the glenohumeral joint, and 60 degrees from upward scapular rotation. Joshua's laughing right now. I don't know.
We'll get there in a minute.
Don't laugh at him.
No. It's just okay. Listen, just let me get the skeleton again. All right. What do we have on? So,
but is it?
Here's the deal.
Is it?
I'm just going to shift the camera real quick, so I'm going to step off.
Can you describe it for the people who only listen?
Yeah, for the people who only listen, what I'm doing is demonstrating where bony impingement starts if the scapula doesn't move. The reason that I laughed is not because it was a dumb question. It's a great question. I laughed because the truth is that this is one of the most misunderstood things in any discussion relating to shoulder movement. So this is a basically very neutral shoulder. And you notice there's a space issue here, right? This is not the best skeleton, which is part of why I'm sending it back. When I lift up to 90, look at what's going on. This is at 90 right here. Okay? There is basically no space left here. These bones are touching each other. Like if I'm in a handstand, right? Because this is the alignment. If I'm here, then and I try and go up past 90, 100 degrees, I am going to be causing a lot of pain. In fact, this is something you can do to lose your license and intentionally damage somebody, which would be retarded because that's how much pressure there is. If you immobilize the shoulder blade and you lift up on somebody, once they get to 90, 100 degrees, they're in pain. Even somebody who's not injured, they can tell this ain't right. There's not a lot of space under there. So the shoulder actually starts moving almost immediately. You can get up to about 90 degrees, technically speaking, without any scapular movement, but that would be really dumb, and so our shoulder blades move anyways to protect us. Because when they move, this bone right here, which is called the acromion, it lifts up. And so instead of being here, this skeleton, the shoulder blade doesn't move, so which is part of why I'm sending it back. But you can see how if I'm here, even if I just, simulate the lift, I can go further. So it kind of gets out of its own way. And that's really the basic point that you need to understand about shoulder movement, is that there's not a magic number that you want to think about limiting your body. You want to let it move the way it was designed to move.
Okay.
So that you are always training in a way that's going to benefit what you're looking for. So there are exceptions for bodybuilders, and a lot of times you'll see the guys who are really locking the scapula down, they don't go up past 60, 70 degrees because they have very likely learned through experience that doesn't feel very good. So there are a lot of specialized things in non-performance sports that you could do that do have a place sometimes. But when it comes to handstand training, the biggest thing is learning to control your rib cage. And that's what allows your body to sort of learn correct shoulder movement. So I just don't understand. Remind me again what the question was.
Yes, I wasn't done actually saying the question. So first off, he started off with saying he doesn't have 180-degree shoulder flexion.
Yeah.
And then he explains that full shoulder flexion, 120 degrees comes from the glenohumeral.
Yeah, it's
60
wrong.
degrees comes from the upward scapular rotation.
Yeah,
And then he asks,
that's all wrong.
How do I know if that the range of motion that I'm lacking from is either from the gleno? So how do I know it's from the
It's always
glenohumeral
scapular.
or it's the scapula? It's always okay.
It's always
that's
scapular.
That's his question, basically.
Yeah.
So it's always scapular.
Yeah, it's
And how do I go about, increasing that range of motion?
there are a lot of ways to approach that. Which way will work best for you depends heavily on whether your problem is more of a true flexibility issue or whether you have compensation patterns. And when you have compensation patterns, and that's a broad, meaningless term until I define it. So when you create, a vertical arm by arching your back and, lifting your head way up like this, then what ends up happening is your rib cage is shifting, your shoulder's not moving. And so your body kind of learns that when you're in that position, it doesn't want to go further. That's kind of how all of our joint proprioception-based reflexes work, is when they enter a place that is not familiar, they send excitatory signals to basically to the antagonistic movement, and they damp down the agonist. So like if you're lifting up, your lats kind of turn on, and which people have probably experienced this, and the scapular musculature kind of shuts down a little bit, and the wrong ones start working because your body says, whoa, I haven't been here, I don't like it, I need to just not move anymore. In that case, a lot of those people, they need to relearn what we'll call mobility, meaning active control of movement, because that's the part that's screwing them up. Those people tend to get impingement when they try to stretch hard, and they tend to not see the best results from just stretching. So there's a more integrated approach for that, and some of it is just learning a good overhead press seated. I'm not a fan of standing overhead press these days.
Why is that?
It's very it's just very easy to cause back injuries and to sort of reinforce
Lower back injuries?
Yeah, lower back. And it's all,
yeah, it makes sense. I feel that.
Yeah, and it's also it kind of forces you into a pattern that you don't necessarily want to do, and the bottom line is that it ends up being very high risk at higher weights relative to the strength you stand to gain. Whereas you could gain the exact same shoulder strength with correct seated shoulder presses and run into basically none of the safety issues. So when you have a choice like that, I think that it's very easy. The only exception would be people in strongman competitor events, and even there, the bulk of the lifting, I would say, would still benefit from being seated, and you always keep a certain amount of standing in so you can kind of work on your technique, make sure you keep it good, and then you transition as you get to closer competition so that you're able to do things, but you can't eliminate, but you minimize your unnecessary injury risk, right? So
Yeah, makes sense.
So the answer is that there's some people will find stretching helps. Some people will find, for example, that, and I think a good way to figure this out is that if your mobility is, if you're able to keep your chin tucked to your chest and tuck up in a pull-up and hang from your arms, like in a dead hang, and achieve a much more open shoulder position with much less discomfort or no discomfort than you can when you try and do stretches, then mobility is your big problem. And your body has literally been programmed to work against itself, and you need to undo that. If you find that they're fairly similar and that you really don't notice a big difference, then because you're going to find that, well, I can already do this in a hang. How come this is an issue? And it's because you just haven't learned how to shut down the lats during the pull-up. They're still working. You're just allowing them to lengthen. But that's really what you're hanging off of, is your shoulders and your lats. The whole pattern is very different from an overhead press. And so when you find that your ability to maintain position is way different, then you need a more mobility based approach, which means that static stretches won't help so much. It's more about an integrated approach that involves direct pressure on limiting movements and limiting muscles, and then progressive exercises that let you learn to move correctly. And that's really what does the trick. So it's one way or the other for most people.
That's it.
Yeah.
Alan.
So I'm not saying that stretches are bad. I'm just saying that they're not necessarily going to do you the most good if the true flexibility is less of an issue than positional control. Does that make sense?
Makes sense. It makes sense. Alan, your question has been answered. We have answered a bunch of questions, and I think that's enough for the first podcast. Thank you guys for sending those questions in. We love answering them. We hope you're excited for Labco Fitness as much as we are. And Josh, you want to say a nice goodbye?
Bye-bye. No,
Bye, y'all.
No, thanks for tuning in. We really appreciate it. Subscribe to the feed. Keep up with us. And tell your friends about the things that you're learning here, and go out and do the things that you dream about. I want you, I mean, not it's weird stuff, but, when it comes to chasing your dreams and, they're wholesome, go for it.
Alrighty, guys. Have a good one. Later.